The operation had gone FUBAR. The Hatchet team of American and South Vietnamese commandos was encircled by a superior enemy force, as usual. Except that this time, they were entirely pinned down, and air support was no longer an option due to the dozens of anti-aircraft guns in the area. Although the primary objective of destroying the NVA's 559th Transportation Group's forward headquarters was partially achieved, their high-value target, General Giap, one of the highest-ranking and most experienced North Vietnamese officers, had escaped without a scratch. Barely half of the 80-man force had survived the initial incursion, and several aircraft had been shot down. As the flames and debris covered the zone, the commandos and their allies desperately tried to fight their way out with the scarce ammunition they had left. Their sole hope was one last airstrike that could give them a respite amid infinite waves of NVAs. The United States decided to create MACV-SOG as a classified unit that could operate in small numbers behind enemy lines to gather intelligence and sabotage the expansion of communism in South Vietnam. According to the U.S. Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group Annex A Command History from 1964, MACV-SOG's official mission was to, quote, execute an intensified program of harassment, diversion, political pressure, the capture of prisoners, physical destruction, acquisition of intelligence, generation of propaganda, and diversion of resources against the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. MACV-SOG was also tasked with sabotage, reconnaissance, personnel recovery, counterintelligence, and other classified operations. The unit was led by a Special Forces colonel and formed by top-tier personnel from all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, namely a rigorous selection of men from the ranks of the Army Special Forces or Green Berets, Air Force, Navy SEALs, Marines, and even CIA personnel. From 1964 onward, small groups of elite MACV personnel, aided by South Vietnamese commandos, would begin making high-altitude, low-opening parachute jumps behind enemy lines to gather intel and wreak havoc in the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. MACV teams were given considerable freedom in terms of the many tactics they could employ to accomplish their objective, as well as the weapons, uniforms, and equipment they could carry. The operators wore the famous tiger stripe camouflage pattern employed by their South Vietnamese counterparts. Nonetheless, they did not carry any unit patches, insignias, or dog tags to avoid being identified by the enemy. Their weapons didn't even have serial numbers. They often used enemy equipment, especially firearms like the AK-47 and RPK machine gun, to confuse the enemy during firefights. MACV members also had access to unique equipment, such as the XM-177 Commando Carbine, a shortened version of the M16, the XM-22 or Stoner 63 machine gun, and a sawed-off M79 grenade launcher. In addition, while deep in the jungle, MACV-SOG teams communicated closely with forward air control fixed-wing aircraft for close air support and immediate extractions when missions went wrong. MACV teams usually comprised 10 men, of which 2 to 4 were Americans, and the rest were either Vietnamese, Cambodian, or Chinese commandos, highly loyal to their U.S. team members. Most operations lasted from 3 to 7 days, and it was not uncommon for the 10-man squads to be surrounded by hundreds of North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops. They were mysterious men undergoing mysterious missions. No one officially knew who they were, not even the friendly grunts they came upon. This level of lethality, firepower, and effectiveness made MACV-SOG the ideal unit for the most compromising and difficult operations. As the Vietnam War raged on, MACV-SOG saw itself operating across all of Vietnam to eradicate the enemy guerrilla presence in the south and stop the flow of supplies from the north, especially those that came from the well-engineered and heavily concealed Ho Chi Minh Trail. This supply route, concealed by the thick jungle canopy, crossed rivers with improvised bridges and disappeared below mountains through sophisticated underground tunnels, interconnected with underground barracks, medical centers, supply depots, and other facilities the American troops could not destroy. The Ho Chi Minh Trail ran from North Vietnam to South Vietnam and passed through Laos and Cambodia. Tens of thousands of men and supplies traversed the trail day and night, delivering goods to NVA and Viet Cong garrisons in the countryside. From Soviet tanks and trucks to Chinese-made replicas of Soviet rifles, machine guns, and artillery pieces, the trail was the heart and soul of the communist fighting spirit. Without the trail, there was no NVA. Operation Rolling Thunder, the mass bombardment of the trail, had lackluster results, and MACV-SOG had resorted to more conventional but dangerous tactics of getting close and personal with enemy supply bases to gather intelligence and destroy them with the assistance of heavy air support. There were dozens of supply bases, barracks, and NVA headquarters near the Ho Chi Minh Trail. One of them was OSCAR-8, General Vobam's 559th Transportation Group's forward headquarters. Additionally, it was the trail's main control center and the largest NVA storage facility outside North Vietnam. OSCAR-8 was located in Laos. It was a bowl-shaped area over 600 yards long and 2 miles wide, a defender's dream. It was located only 10 miles away from the U.S. Marine base at Ca San in the northern sector of South Vietnam. Although it seemed easy to just send in the Leathernecks to get rid of the enemy HQ, politics forbade U.S. troops from operating inside Laos and Cambodia. The conflict was limited to Vietnamese territory. That's where MACV-SOG came in. These special operators, with no official relationship with the armed forces, now had a new task: get rid of General Vobam's 559 Transportation Group's forward headquarters. But it would not be easy. The enemy base was heavily defended. Multiple belts of anti-aircraft artillery, or AAA guns, were stationed around the base, and others were mounted on platforms outside the base and camouflaged to conceal them from American aircraft. As if that was not enough to favor the NVA, the only possible landing zone, or LZ, was a wide bowl surrounded by the thick and humid jungle canopy, where enemy infantry awaited newcomers in underground tunnels and bunkers. OSCAR-8 was of the utmost importance due to the area's high volume of vehicles in transit. Weapons, ammunition, explosives, food, medical supplies, and all the essentials for launching new offensives were stored at OSCAR-8. If MACV-SOG could get rid of the base, it would represent a tremendous blow to NVA logistics and would surely prevent them from launching more offensive operations, at least for a few months. While MACV-SOG was preparing the operation and gathering troops and more intel about the North Vietnamese base, they received an incredible last-minute report. Commanding General of the Army, Nguyen Van Giap, the victor of Dien Bien Phu against the French in 1954, was inspecting the base. Giap instantly became a secondary objective: capture him or destroy him. The plan of action began with a carefully coordinated strike. On the designated day at 5 a.m., 9 B-52 bombers would work the target before the SOG commandos launched. Flying in a V of V's formation, they would drop 945 bombs of 200 kilograms each on the OSCAR-8 target area. This massive B-52 airstrike aimed to weaken the enemy's defenses and pave the way for the team's insertion. Within 15 minutes of the last bombing, Marine CH-46 helicopters would drop off an 80-man SOG commando unit, a Hatchet force, a company-sized element that specialized in large-scale raids and ambushes, consisting of Americans and Nung mercenary troops, to assess the situation and gather intelligence. The actual defensive position and helicopter landing zone consisted of a very large bomb crater. It would only accommodate a single aircraft, so the CH-46s had to go in one at a time. The Hatchet Force's critical mission encompassed sweeping the target area, evaluating the extent of the damage inflicted by the B-52s, eliminating any remaining enemy survivors, obliterating equipment, and most importantly, neutralizing the high-value target, Giap. To bolster their efforts and ensure success, SOG headquarters placed various Air Force, Marine, and Navy fixed and rotary wing squadrons on standby. This extensive support network included 3 CH-46 Sea Knight helicopters to ferry the Hatchet Force, 4 UH-1 Huey gunships primed for close air support, 2 A-1E Skyraider aircraft available for immediate air support, 4 F-4C Phantom fighter jets ready for close air support, 2 H-34 helicopters equipped for combat search and rescue, and 2 forward observer aircraft tasked with coordinating tactical air support. At 4 a.m., Sergeant Major William Waugh took off from Ca San in an O-2 aircraft and arrived at the designated area within 35 minutes. Approaching the target from the west, about 15 kilometers south of the OSCAR-8 target, he loitered in position, awaiting the strike. At 5:45 a.m., as he scanned the skies to the south and east, he noticed contrails at an altitude of around 30,000 feet. These contrails were approaching the OSCAR-8 target area in the early morning dawn. However, he couldn't spot any aircraft accompanying the contrails. As the contrails moved closer, he could make out the Oscar-8 target becoming faintly visible in the early morning light. He later wrote, quote, "Smoke from several early morning cooking fires was spotted in Oscar-8 as these NVA units prepared the morning rice meal." As the sun began rising, 3 sets of B-52 aircraft flew over the Oscar-8 target area, dropping their load of high-explosive dumb bombs on the North Vietnamese headquarters and the adjoining positions. But minutes later, the forward air controller flying overhead identified North Vietnamese troops coming out of the vegetation and controlling the fires. Much to Wa's dismay, the enemy numbers continued to swell. The North Vietnamese had largely managed to escape the onslaught from above. The O-2's pilot juked his aircraft to avoid enemy fire, while Wa hastily radioed headquarters and advised aborting the inbound Hatchet force. But he was too late. According to Wa's account, quote, "As we looked up in trepidation, 2 CH-46s were shot down while still airborne, prior to touchdown. The CH-46s were approximately 50 to 100 feet in the air when both were shot into 2 separate pieces. Troops could be seen tumbling from both of the aircraft as these aircraft crashed into the LZs. The NVA guns were shooting down at the targets from elevated positions." Then followed the UH-1 Huey gunships that were providing close air support. At 4,000 feet above the landing zone, Wa tried to make contact with the command and control detachment back in Kazan. Then he remembered, quote, "As I scanned Oscar-8, NVA ground fire took on every bird in the sky, for 2 H-34s were attempting to move into the LZs to pick up survivors. One of the H-34 aircraft was raked with enemy fire and burst into flames, crashing directly on route number 922. I spotted the H-34 crew members scurrying out of the H-34 to the south of route 922. The SOG force found themselves surrounded by a much larger enemy, seeking shelter in bomb craters to survive. The Hatchet force's firepower was their only defense against being overrun. 2 F-4 Phantom jets arrived for air support, but one was shot down by intense anti-aircraft fire. The A-1E Skyraiders followed, but they also faced overwhelming anti-aircraft fire. With about 45 SOG commandos under heavy enemy fire, their leader urgently called for napalm and cluster bombs to create a protective perimeter. Simultaneously, another Hatchet force was assembled as a quick reaction team. In a race against time, aircraft bound for North Vietnam were redirected to fly over Oscar-8 to divert the enemy's attention from the embattled SOG team. For 2 long days, the North Vietnamese pushed back against the SOG, preventing the quick reaction force from reaching the stranded commandos. However, relentless air attacks were launched against the enemy, allowing the Hatchet force to hold on and stay alive amidst the chaos. Regrettably, the battle took a toll on both sides. Several members of the SOG and their supporting units, along with around 50 local fighters, were either wounded, neutralized, captured, or went missing during the operation. The skies were not spared either, as numerous aircraft were lost. Among the wounded was Sergeant First Class Charles Wilklow, a valiant American soldier who fell into the hands of the North Vietnamese. His captors used him as bait to lure a rescue force, but Wilklow's determination and resilience were unwavering. After enduring 4 grueling days as a prisoner, he managed to escape and was finally rescued by a courageous combat search and rescue team 5 days after the battle began. Eventually, Oscar-8 turned out to be a disaster for the SOG. Their mission objectives remained unfulfilled, but it was the indomitable spirit of the commandos and the air crews that prevented an even greater catastrophe.